Hello everyone, my name is Chris Ayers. I'm going to be presenting on Application Insights today for the Azure Advent Calendar. Now this is my first video, so please bear with me if there's any technical difficulties or quality issues, but hopefully I can keep this going and quality will only go up from here. So let me turn off my video and I'm going to go through the slides and then we're going to look at some code and look at the Azure portal and see what Application Insights can give us. So first, a little bit about myself. Um, I'm an Azure DevOps consultant with a company called New Signature. I've been developing for over 20 years. I actually started programming in second grade. I sometimes blog and sometimes share things on Twitter and LinkedIn and occasionally get into Twitter fights about why it's okay to deploy on Friday or any other day if you have good DevOps pipelines and monitoring. So we're going to talk about what an APM is, App Insights itself, look at some things in the Azure portal, and then look at how Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code can interact with App Insights. So an APM, sometimes called the Application Performance Monitor, sometimes management, takes performance data, metrics, traces, errors, kind of puts it all into a holistic picture where you can monitor and look at the things you really care about and put multiple pieces of data together to have a more holistic view of what's happening with the internal state of the system. Um, it's not just logging all the things, but we can log a lot of things if we want to. Um, App Insights itself, Application Insights, is an instance of an APM, but it's very extensible. We have live streaming, so we can monitor live applications. There's AI that's built in, so it can detect performance anomalies automatically. If your application has a memory leak, App Insights can detect that and actually alert you, hey, we're seeing a degradation in performance. We're seeing an increase in memory usage. So it can give you a direction to go look at things that you might not be aware of. There's some very powerful analytics tools that you can use looking for like certain requests or servers, browser type, time of day, whatever you want to do. It's always being improved, works on multiple platforms. And the thing that a lot of people don't realize, you can use it with on-prem applications, you can use it with console applications, you can use it just about anywhere. The application just needs to be able to reach certain URLs that are hosted on Microsoft on port 443. So an outgoing HTTPS connection is usually all that's required to get the telemetry back home. Uh, One of the nice things, being a DevOps consultant, is having App Insights integrate with the DevOps pipeline. So it can do a thing called release annotations, which lets App Insights know when new versions are released. And so you can start doing things like comparing performance or error rates between like version 1 and version 2. Also, it works with App Center and Hockey App, which are the mobile application side of things. So if you have mobile apps, they can ship some of that data back and integrate in. Now, the way App Insights works, there is a small snippet of JavaScript. Now, you can use an NPM package that Microsoft provides, but there's a small JavaScript snippet you just put into your index HTML or your HTML views if you're using MVC, and that lets you capture client-side errors. So historically, it's been kind of hard to get JavaScript errors from the client's browser or page view render times, sometimes dependent HTTP calls REST calls that the client makes out to other services that aren't yours. Now you can capture some of that with App Insights. On your website, there's on the back-end side, npm NuGet packages. They provide a large selection of NuGet packages for .NET applications. They have support for Python and Java and Node. So there are numerous back-end systems that you can now instrument. And if it's running in Azure, well, background services are like automatically captured. You can usually do it as an extension on like a VM or an app service, but you can also add NuGet packages to like pick up Windows statistics, like what's the CPU and memory, or Docker containers, Kubernetes, Service Fabric, and it also will automatically detect dependent calls out to SQL or other HTTP calls. All that data, all that telemetry, some of your logging messages, traces, all of that gets fed into Application Insights, and that can then generate alerts, Power BI reports. It can integrate back into Visual Studio with the tooling so that you can see in CodeLens if you have some of the higher licenses of Visual Studio, some of that information about data, like performance and error rates, right in with the code, or you can just export it or query it through REST APIs. Now, there's a lot of data that it gets. So you can just see, like off the bat right here, request rates, response times, failure rates, dependent calls and how many of those fail, the actual exceptions, and call traces. That's huge. On the browser side, you can see page views and actual load time performance. So like how long it takes to get the page and render it. Ajax calls, how many users are on your site and the sessions, different performance counters. So maybe how many garbage collection incidents are happening in .NET, or host diagnostics, or trace logs. And then you can make your own events and your own metrics. So on the marketing side, you can generate events so that you can build a funnel if you want people to do certain actions. There's a lot of customization and extensibility on this. So they provide, and we're going to go look at some of these, but they provide kind of right off the bat, you can get all these nice little charts and graphs, time periods. You can they have pre-canned ones for availability and failures, the live streaming. It will automatically generate application maps, the smart detection, like I mentioned earlier, based on I think it defaults to the last 7 days, but you can limit it if you've made changes. The application map where it determines which pieces are talking to what other pieces. It can look at, oh, it's talking to this table a lot, or this server is talking to that server. You can see the requests, the performance of those requests, so it gives you a quick bird's eye view of your system running in the actual ecosystem it runs in. There is a profiler, but this is not like the focus shouldn't be on the profiling, but this supports profiling some of the hot code that you can actually enable this. The live metrics is actually huge. If you're doing a big release, if you're doing some load testing, if you've just sent out a mass mailing or coupon to somebody and you're running an e-commerce site, seeing some of the data live can give you a lot of value. And it shows you how many servers are online, so it can actually see all the servers kind of as a cohesive report, but you can drill down to a single server if you need to, if you're seeing something anomalous. Now, like I said, with usage, like there's user behavior, so you can see the browser types, the countries they're coming from, the specific actions different people are doing, or well, different groups of people are doing. So the page views, how many sessions are happening at a given time. And then this is actually the biggest feature I use most of the time, which is searching. So just searching through the queries, I can drill down to a time period, a request path, some sort of dependency. I can look for certain exceptions, and then I can look at all of the events related to a single request from top to bottom and drill down and see what was the path of execution that maybe caused a failure or slow performance. Now, most of the stuff is like all of the App Insights stuff is pretty much included. It all is based on the data. And the data, you get the first 5 gigs for free every month. And then, if you get a lot more data, you have to pay for it, obviously. But what's good about App Insights is this is by default, it goes for 100% telemetry. So it will capture every request that it sees. But this is a sampling engine. So you can say, when you first implement it, capture 100% of all my data. And then once you've identified strangeness, exceptional behaviors, errors, and you're starting to, and the system's running smoothly, you can lower that sampling rate down to like 50% or 30% so that you can start identifying trends as they happen instead of trying to look through all the data. So I'll talk about that in the portal. And I will also bring up specifically with Visual Studio how it connects through Visual Studio to App Insights and where you can actually see right baked into the code lens the failed requests, the response times, the reliability, and you can search through some of that data right inside the tooling so that they give you that support from Visual Studio so you don't have to keep switching back and forth all over the place. Well, let's go take a look at it. Let's dive into things, and I will turn back on my camera. All right, so hi again. Let's dive into the Azure portal. But first, let's look at the code. I just really want to show you how to add it in and what it gets. So this is an MVC5 app. So it's still running on Framework. It's not on Core. And if you notice, I've right-clicked on the web app, and there's this overview button here. You could also right-click, I think, on the properties on the connected services. So I want to look at the connected services, and you can see there's some options here, and one of them, and I'm just trying to show some of the tooling, is App Insights. So when I'm running locally, I can click on where I'm sending my telemetry, and this will send it up to an App Insights resource in the cloud. This will let me, when I'm debugging, have that logged in. And then on the flip side, I can have Code Lens and Diagnostics pull from a resource. Now this is looking at my subscriptions, it's seeing which resources I have, and this will automatically update things for me. Now what is it updating? This is the kind of the cool part. So to get App Insights working in an MVC application, really all I have to do is add Application Insights. Now there are add-ons for it that provide extra logging. So, if I want to add in dependency collection, this says this is a dependent package. So usually I'll add web. So I'm doing a web project. This will bring in some of those other pieces, or if I'm running on a Windows server. But the web one is kind of important because it adds a lot of the telemetry correlation. But this will automatically capture exceptions in our code and send them up to App Insights. And it'll add this little App Insights config file. And when I did that overview and configuration, it put my instrumentation key here. This is the key that lets it know which resource. So I'm going to just go ahead and run this application. I've got it sending data up to App Insights. And we're going to just take a look at what this application does and what it looks like. So it's starting to spin up. One of the nice things is App Insights handles all the telemetry stuff on a background thread, and it sends it up in batches. It's supposed to have a super minimal impact on an application's performance, and I think like negligible. I've never had an impact from using App Insights. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's much. It's worth it for what you get. So this is App Insights. I've got a live stream going, and you can see that my application is now running, and it's listing my laptop. You can see some of the requests a second. If I refresh a couple of times, you'll see, I'm getting some requests. I'm getting some dependent calls. Oh, and I'm getting some errors. If I look, so this just is showing the URL it was hitting. So that's coming from the browser. But this is giving me a full call stack. And it's telling me in my web app controllers, time controller later, an exception was thrown. So let's go back into the code. You can see there's been a couple of exceptions, but let's go look at the time controller. And you can see I was passing in -1, and my code was saying, hey, throw that exception. But you can look, here's that telemetry that we hooked up in Visual Studio. I can now see I've had 2 requests and 2 of them have failed, and this is live, and I can see the average response time. And I can crawl into some of that app see, here's my resource. I can see a rating on my telemetry, and it's doing a search. Now I will say, live streaming is awesome. This data sometimes takes it up to like 5 minutes. I've seen 5 to 15 minutes, depending upon the amount of traffic going in, for it to show up in the search. Yeah, so you can see I've been playing around a little bit. Let me just try to limit it to the last 30 minutes. Yeah, see, here we go. This loaded now, and you can see some of my errors and some of the graphing. But come on. Well, while that's waiting, I'm going to look at the application map just to kind of give you a high-level overview of some of the things out in the portal, and we'll kind of switch back and forth between the code and the portal. So this is showing, hey, I'm calling my application. That's calling a local database. It's made 61 calls, average time. And here I've got 14% of my calls. Yep, there we go. Top failing requests. Slowest request by name. So there's some cool information there. And, you know, let's look at smart detection. I doubt it'll find anything. You know, I can set my time range a little bit shorter. Yeah, it hasn't detected anything. Let's play around a little bit more with the live stream while I'm seeing stuff. So you can tell with my MVC application, it's getting my memory, it's getting information about my CPU, my dependent. You know, no telemetry is coming in right now. So if I tried some bad path, I got a 500. You can see, hey, look, I was trying to get this, and it's giving me the actual MVC call stack for that. And if I go back and I refresh, you can see I had a couple more dependent calls. I had some requests, and I've got more telemetry. It's doing that error again. So that's kind of cool. Let's try something else. Let's do. Oh, sorry. Account login. So it's giving me the login screen. I'll try putting in a password. Oh, yeah, invalid attempt. But if you look over here, I logged an event. So this is one of my custom events that I added to the system, just so that I can have a couple events. Okay, and if we come over here and we take a look, I had a login event. So we've got some streaming data. Now let's try that search again, see if search will come back this time. It might have been because I was doing a search here, I'm not sure. Okay, so it came back. You can see some of the individual requests. You can see some of the dependent calls. This is automatically determined I had a dependent call out to SQL. But you'll notice it only shows you the database and the table, essentially. It doesn't show you the queries. I'll dive into this a little bit more, but you have to kind of put a little bit extra code there if you want to capture your own queries. And the SQL tracking, when you do it, will show usually the query, but not the parameters if you configure it right. Like you have to make sure that you're aware of any PII or PCI that's in your logging, just like with any other logging issue. You want to make sure that nothing is sensitive that might get logged out. But this is really nice. I can filter it by certain event types. Maybe I just want to look at dependencies, or maybe I just want to look at exceptions. I can also, um, yeah, on the filter side, I should be able to. Demo gods, you know how they are. Well, let's try this. Yep, if you notice, you can do specific time ranges. We only want exceptions. There we go. Just took it a minute. So when you have people log in, you can add a telemetry to it to log their user or company type information. You can gather the type of telemetry you're getting. If you want to add in um, like a session ID, this can try to auto detect the operating system, but you can add it. So if I'm using a lot of the web stuff, which I'll dive into, you can pull the browser and device type, the city it's coming from. Since this is mainly doing a lot of backend logging right now, that's why I'm not getting a lot of client information. Also, App Insights will zero out all the client IPs because of GDPR. So, and I mentioned DevOps, you can integrate in and you can, when you're releasing code, do release annotations and you can put the version into the application. So searching gives you lots of functionality. You can really use it to, well, since I'm here, you can really use it to explore. So if I saw that I was seeing something with time, maybe I can go /API, look for all the things that have /API in them. You can filter by domain name, you can filter by city, browser. So hmm, it's just deciding to be slow today. Oh, there we go. Just when you thought it was safe to go back into water. So I can see all of the requests that have happened with that call, and you can see the response times and the response codes. So this is great. Um, Availability of applications. You can set health check type endpoints. This will do the filter graph, which I love. You can dive into just dependencies. You can get the calls that introduce dependencies or exceptions. On the side over here, you can see the exception types that get generated from those, and you can then see the call stacks. It'll take you to the request. So the request came in for that, and it generated that. You can see the duration of it. You can explore similar ones. This is a really great way to dive into what's happening with my application. And then under the Performance tab, now you'll notice they also have a browser one here. Uh, I'll dive into that a little bit more when we get to the Angular stuff. But this is showing you different calls and their 99th, 95th, 50th percentile on dependent calls. It's really cool. Um, Now we looked at MVC. There's one or two other things I just want to touch on with the MVC side of things. Now this is doing backend code. So this is .NET. This supports a lot of other languages, but I made a new telemetry client, and if you see here, this is where I was logging some of those events. I've logged login attempt, log out, just normal stuff. I didn't log these exceptions here. This was captured for me automatically. Now, in older versions of App Insights, you had to add in a little error handler here. This was a filter that you would register, and it would track an exception. So it got added into the pipeline, and it automatically tracked, um, yeah, automatically tracked exceptions. You don't have to do that anymore. The newer versions of App Insights are all handled pretty much in the App Insights config. There is an entry that gets added in the web config for some of the telemetry correlation and App Insights web tracking, and you can see that it adds a couple of modules to initialize this, but all of that's generally controlled through the App Insights config. Now this has an instrumentation key in this App Insights config, and you can transform that in your pipelines. Also, you can assign it manually. So if you had a different way you wanted to initialize this, I could pretty much come in here and go to Microsoft Application Insights, extensibility, telemetry configuration, active, instrumentation key, and I could set that key to anything else I wanted. So I could take it out of my App Insights config and maybe put it in my web config or my app config as an app setting, and then have that transformed. So you're not locked in. The other cool thing is you can see all the pieces that it's adding, and you can add and remove them if you don't want things like account ID and telemetry. You can this provides you a ton of customization for stripping out fields, adjusting sampling rates. You know, if you're starting to see noise in your system because this is showing you lots of maybe 401s on images or 404s on images or 401s on authentication requests, what you can do is you could write a custom telemetry to ignore that. Uh, let's see here. They have some really great APIs for a lot of these events, like I showed you, across numbers of languages. Like I said, Java, Node, VB. You can track metrics. It's kind of nuts the level of detail that you can capture. So we had some events. I showed you those. I did the login and um, yeah. So why is this not showing me? Oh, here we go. So had a couple events. Those were today. So I can look at some insights into my events. You can see I was on Windows 10 in the US. Why do I care about these events? So by default, App Insights, every single page or request is a different thing that's kind of hard to build a funnel around or build some reporting around. So maybe, I'm really concerned about, that was strange, specific events. And those events, let's try this one more time. Yep, there we go. What's nice about these events is that you can generate funnels on them. So when you're starting to develop applications, if you want um, people to do certain actions in a certain order, maybe like, hey, anytime someone gets an invalid login, I definitely want to see them log in. Or, hey, I want someone to hit the home page and then log in. So you can define this path of events you want people to step through, just like with normal marketing stuff, and see where they fall out of the funnel, and see when they fall out of doing something, and try to figure out why. And the other cool thing that this allows you to do is another feature of App Insights called user flows. So this is like, hey, what happens So hey, I had a session start, I had an invalid login attempt, and then I logged in. Oh, and then I had an invalid login attempt. So this was me showing this, but what's really, really interesting is when you see one of these bigger flows where people have opened a search and gone down certain paths. And so you can see how people actually use their applications. I've gone in with clients and helped set up App Insights, and they didn't know how people were using their application, or they thought they did. They had like a grid on a page and they had a quick edit, but they saw people like going to a full editor and then going back to the grid over and over again. And it was because there was one column they didn't have in their quick edit that the users needed. And so the users were going around and doing things more inefficiently. And as the client talked to the user, they were like, oh, they added in the column and this flow completely changed and the user experience got better. So that's one cool feature of App Insights. The other one that I was trying to find a funnel. Yeah, here. So here's a funnel where they're doing things, and then 52% of the people continue to the next step in the funnel, or people have left, and what were they doing when they came back, and what's the impact of things. So you can get some really interesting insights on how your application is used by your users by looking at some of the events and page naming. That is usually the first thing people do after they implement um, application insights is they start going through and cleaning up the page views and cleaning and adding custom events to so that they have data that's important to them. Yeah. All right. So that was setting the key. Now this is all the backend stuff, but for the front end stuff, there's still a piece you have to add. So if you see here, um, actually this is from an older application where um, I actually don't implement it that way anymore. I usually on MVC Razor apps do just like we did in the global ASACs. Whoops, and pass in a dynamic, you know, instrumentation key. That way, this is automatically um, tracking JavaScript, which my example wasn't. But this script here is provided by Microsoft. This is what you apply to your pages to have the JavaScript side get tracked by App Insights. So if I look for Application Insights JavaScript, Microsoft's documentation is crazy good just across the board. And so they have an npm package, which is great for Angular apps. And then here is the new little snippet that they have provided. And you just copy and paste that in and provide your instrumentation key. Um, Super awesome. Can't, so I've added this to my layout, and that's usually all you need to do, and you're good to go. So going back to our live stream. I've still got my MVC application running, but let's look at an ASP Core app. It's a little different. It's actually a little easier in some ways. Yeah, still getting telemetry. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this and close it. And you'll see we had one server online, and shortly it should go away. No servers online. So I also have, this is a .NET Core application that, if you look here in my app settings, I've got Application Insights and an instrumentation key. And here in Startup, Program, I've got Use Application Insights. Now this was .NET Core 2.2 or 2.1. I am going to be having on GitHub sample code in .NET Core 3 and the framework for the MVC side, but pretty much that's all you got to do on the .NET Core side. Um, it's and here's documentation on it. They have the prerequisites. Here's the packages they had adding. Now it's moved under configure services. So services dot add application insights telemetry and just the same key. And you can specify warnings. Or you can pass it in through environment variables, which I love. It's great for Docker containers. So let's see what this looks like. Also, in this particular application, I have, whoops, I have an Angular app. Now this uses the environments. Oh, I'm sorry. This one doesn't use the environments. This uses a module where I have the App Insights key. I need to provide the sample application where instead of setting your configuration through um, your environment configuration, your environment TS, there's some great articles out there on using a uh, config value, like a config.json that's an asset in your Angular app, and then that gets injected through like a config service. That way it's easy to transform in a pipeline. Unfortunately, most of the time with the new Angular apps, the NG Angular CLI, it puts a lot of configuration in environment TS, and it's hard to transform. So I was not doing that in this module, and I was just I'm planning on adding that transformation. But I was using this module as well. There's a newer module that's available from Microsoft, but it has a very similar syntax. So when I finish updating my example, so I've got some tracking events added to my modules, and there's a tracking service here. This, what's nice, is takes in the router, and so every time the state changes, it'll send a routing event um, so that you can get that information in App Insights. So on this one, you can see, hey, I've got a server running again since I started a .NET application. And see if we've got some telemetry. You can see some requests. You can see some request durations. But notice I don't have some of the host information. And coming down here to performance, let's see if I can get some browser information now. Um, yeah, so here I was looking at some pages and I can see some of the render times for requests. And I've got some samples here that show the time. Now, I did mention earlier about costs. Um, there's an estimator. It tells you the costs and the data ingestion and has estimates on things. Now, I did mention that we were sampling 100% of the data. So if I look at change sampling rate, you can see all data is being sampled by App Insights, and I can lower that. So my recommendation is usually start at 100%, clean up your data, get it dialed in how you want, and then as your data usage goes up over time, lower it to the point where you can either still get the indications you want or are keeping the data where you want to be, um, just to kind of keep your cost managed. Let's see. So that's most of App Insights. Now there are some other great things I really want to dive into with this. Um, so I mentioned the user flows. There's some documentation on this, and I'll include this in the blog post about uh, having a little bit more information about seshing and doing some groups with cohorts to group in people. I think as you develop an application, understanding how things are used is enormous. Uh, and I just noticed I skipped something in the search. So as we're learning how people use applications, there's also some more kind of advanced searching called log analytics. Now this is in a language called KQL. If you see this query here, it's got a very SQL-like syntax, but um, like let's look at response duration. What's nice about this, okay, is that it lets you chart out. Here, let's try request. Why is this not finding any of my data? Well, let's try that. Show me a chart. Normally you can chart out things and it's very cool. I have a feeling that because I just set up this instance, well, let's try to figure it out. Let's go with page views. Hasn't found any page views in the last 30 minutes. I think it's going to take a little bit of time to, yeah, I have a feeling it needs a little bit to, there we go. Okay, so I can see requests, and then let's, so dependencies. Let's look at report failures. Yep, you can see some of my local calls, and that's summed by name. I don't like that. Let's try by uh, operation name. Exceptions causing request failures. Yeah. Fortunately, the editor's pretty easy to use, but let me. So again, KQL, um, pretty easy to um, search on stuff, and there's actually a KQL cheat sheet that's very cool for the SQL to KQL mapping. So I'll include this in the blog. This is usually pretty helpful in um, isolating some of those uh, requests. And I think that about covers things. There's also, as I mentioned, telemetry filtering. And Microsoft has, again, great article, great information on this. So they provide you with the dependency filter class, which is a processor, how to add it to the App Insights config file so it's registered in the pipeline. Um, if you want to use it through DI, how to register it there. And then, like, hey, I want to not show 401s. Don't log those to App Insights because it's showing too much data. Or, hey, I only want to log or long requests, not short requests. There's lots of things you can do to tweak the data. Um, and then this is also where you could come in and, yeah, try to remove some of the URLs or streamline your data, hide or obscure data that doesn't need to be seen by anybody. So there are ways to handle all of those requirements. Well, that's all I have. So thank you for joining me, and I hope that you've enjoyed all the other videos that are going on, and I hope that I have some information on my blog and through some of the other articles that you've found that are helpful. So thank you and have a good night.